Welcome back to my channel. My name is Dr. Anwar Youssef Dunbar, and this is Big Discussions 76, my original channel. First of all, please like this video, please share it, and please subscribe to my channel. If you want to donate something to the channel, that information is below in the description box, and you can also leave a super thanks. Also, please consider joining the Big Words LLC Newsletter. In addition to being a YouTube content creator, I'm also a writer with 2 blogs and a book project on the way. And you joining my newsletter would help me out a whole lot. Well, everyone, as I said in part 1, I enjoyed our first discussion so much that I invited Dr. Antony Davies and James R. Harrigan back for another discussion. And they obliged and humored me. And in this discussion, we talked about immigration, and we talked about aspects that are not um, discussed as much regarding this topic, and uh, things that we discussed. I'm still pondering in my mind, as I had not heard these aspects, many of them positive, before. So we didn't go for 90 minutes this time. We only went for 60. So what you're about to watch is part 2 of our discussion. Part 1 is below in the description box. And I'm going to cut right to the credential slide once the discussion ends. Once again, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you want to donate something to the channel, that information is below in the description box. You can also leave a super thanks. And also, please consider joining the Big Words LLC newsletter. And everyone stay safe out there. And as always, remember that your attitude determines your altitude. Take care, and I'll talk to you the next time. Please leave any comments or questions in the comment section below. Take care, and I'll talk to you the next time. Bye-bye. Okay. All right. Well, gentlemen, I'm going to enable my screen share. People in the playback will see this. Antony and James wrote an article in U.S. News and World Report. It's here.
That was a long time ago.
I'm going to leave the link in the description box below. But I did a quick skim of it, and I believe it contains many of the facts and figures that Antony, you just quoted for us.
So this was written quite a while back, and I think I'm pretty comfortable saying that I'm going to stand by everything that's in that article. I don't remember anything coming to light after we wrote that had me changing my mind about something.
Okay. Well, everyone, that's going to be below in the description box, so you can read it for yourself and add to your body of knowledge versus what you're seeing on the mainstream news and the many quarrels you're seeing on Twitter. Okay, so you guys outlined a whole bunch of positives for immigration. Okay. And I think one of the concerns which you dispelled was that there'll be so many people coming that our systems and our social benefits and our country will get overwhelmed.
Yeah, I have two very clear concerns, two very big concerns. The first one is hospital emergency rooms.
Okay.
They get overwhelmed by illegal immigrants who can't get medical help any other way. They know that if they show up to an emergency room in the U.S., they're going to be seen, they're going to be treated, and they won't be chased down for payment if they can't afford it. So that's a thing that is without question going to be a problem. Also, K through 12 is also a real problem because young-ish illegal immigrants show up with very young children. And what do you do with them? Well, you enroll them in school. And okay, they don't speak English. There's all kinds of remedial work that has to be done, and that's going to cost a small fortune, right? It's not all wine and roses when you look at it. What Antony and I say is that on balance, it's much better if we did this rather than that. But there's no magic bullet here, and the hospitals and the schools are always going to be overrun. Going to be a real problem.
And one of the things I like to remind people of is think about what it takes in terms of character to leave a country where you have family, you have friends, you understand the culture, the language, to go to a place not knowing how you're going to survive, not knowing the language, not knowing the culture, not knowing the people, and yet you're going to do this anyway because you believe you can make a better life for yourself. That kind of character, that's what we call entrepreneurs.
Yes,
that's exactly who we want coming into this country.
More, please. And I'll tell you, I moved to the Middle East, to a place where I did not understand the culture and I did not speak the language. And it was fantastically difficult. Now, I had every benefit because my employer gave me a place to live, put some food in there for the day I showed up, and okay, took the edge off and made it possible. How do you just go to a place thousands of miles from your home with no support whatsoever, but you knowing in your heart that you can be a great American? And Antony and I, we see this time after time after time. The people who want to immigrate are better Americans than the people who were born here and have every benefit. And I knew a guy who ran out of communist Europe in the 1950s. And he was a boy when he and his father got to the United States, knowing no one, having no place to go. And he asked his father what they were doing, and he said, we're going home. He said, home? He said, yes, we were born Americans. We were just born in the wrong place. Unbelievable. That's unbelievable. And we need more people like that. Send every last one of them.
Okay. So, James, you just said something interesting about them being better Americans than the people born here. I'm going to try to pull together a bunch of different points here for this next question, and that sounds eerily similar to what we talked about before, in that many immigrants know the workings of our government and our history better than some of the citizens do here. So we know you guys already talked about Social Security and how they're replenishing that well, and we've heard for so many years that it's not going to be there for the Gen Xers and those coming after us. And I'm sure you gentlemen have also heard that the Western countries, ours included, the populations are not replacing. We're below replacement. They're not talking about this. The political class is. Does this have something to do with all of that?
Yeah, it's a Ponzi scheme. And when you no longer have enough people at the bottom of the Ponzi scheme, the Ponzi scheme falls apart.
Yeah, one of the things that contributes to an ever-growing economy is an ever-growing population. Because the more people you have, the more entrepreneurs you have, the more people you have to just simply work. And so we end up producing more stuff. And if we get to a point where our population turns around, starts declining, other things equal, I don't see from that point forward an ever-expanding economy. I see an ever-shrinking economy.
Yep. And I'm a little worried about that. I think that, that's not an unreasonable thing to be worried about.
Okay. Well, I one of the questions was, had you guys heard of Nicholas Eberstadt's work? I don't want to pull you guys into that, but in summary, he's done a lot of work on. Apparently, there's a silent crisis of men not working, younger men not going into the workforce. So that might be another. This may be a remedy for that as well. But also that's indirectly leading to fewer families and fewer children being born. So that was something else I thought about with this. The government needs tax dollars. It needs taxpayers. It needs workers. The economy needs workers. And it sounds like that this is kind of the remedy for whatever is happening here amongst the homegrown citizens of the country.
Yeah, I think that's right. And keep in mind, of course, not all immigrants are entrepreneurs, but I claim that to a greater extent than the native population, they have that entrepreneurial spirit. And if we were successful in closing down our borders and preventing immigration, they're going to go somewhere. They just won't come here. They'll go somewhere else. They'll be entrepreneurs somewhere else. And now the next Amazon, the next eBay, the next Intel is not going to be an American company. It's going to be a foreign company because we didn't let its founders in.
It's strange, Ant. And I don't know if this is happening in Pennsylvania where you are, but it's absolutely happening here in Arizona. Everywhere I go, there are help wanted signs in every window.
Yes.
There are jobs for the asking here. And that might not seem like a big deal until I tell you this. Our minimum wage is over $12 an hour. It's not a federal minimum wage job where you go and you're going to make $7.25. No. You're going to make a pretty healthy wage. And yet there are help wanted signs everywhere I look. And I think to your point on more, the homegrown talent is not stepping in. For whatever the reason, they don't want those jobs. They may say they do, but the revealed preference is clear. If everybody is saying they want good jobs and I see good jobs not being filled, I think we have to conclude that the people don't actually want those jobs. So the next question is, well, who might? And if your answer is a bunch of hardworking immigrants, let them in. Figure out a way to make it we actually wanted to. We just don't want
to. So there's a criticism that will come back here along these lines of, well, look, but all you're saying is you want immigrants to come in and take the bottom of the barrel jobs, and so now we're going to live, opulent lives on the backs of these immigrants who are making minimum wage. And that argument ignores an important truth, and that is those entry-level jobs, we call them entry-level because that's what's happening. You're stepping in,
right.
And within a year, you've moved up. And by the numbers, over the course of 5 years, if you track people who come in at entry-level, over the course of 5 years, 99% of them have moved up to some higher, because why? You develop skills, you develop work experience, contacts. So this is simply a way in. It's not something that the immigrants would come into and stay at.
Okay. Yeah. That's a good point, and I think that here, there's a stigma to those jobs. There's a stigma to entry level jobs, and I think the homegrown talent, we frown upon those jobs. I mean, for a high school student, well, I guess even some high school students don't want to do those, work at McDonald's anymore. I wanted to work at McDonald's when I was 14 and 15. But
I mopped a lot of floors when I was about 17, and I did a number of jobs that, looking back on it, were absolutely dreadful. I mean, they're just terrible. But they taught me all kinds of things. They socialized me into what work is actually like. They had me understand that you can go find a better entry-level job if you're being mistreated at the one you have, right? There are all kinds of things that you'll learn from those first few jobs. And when I was 18, I used to think things like, well, my opinion should matter. People should ask. And you know what? No, that was incorrect. And I learned how idiotic that was by the time I was 30, right? And you look back and you think, well, I knew a lot when I was 18, but I apparently know even less now, the way these things often work. And you figure it out as you go. And I think that every immigrant I've ever seen does exactly that. And if they're in an entry-level job just long enough to perfect their English to some workable degree, that's a thing that needs to happen. We do all of our business in English here. So people have to learn. And you know what? They do. They do right away because they're not having some kind of debate on CNN about this. They're going to make a living. And if you need to make a living, you do what it takes to make a living.
James, what you just said was interesting because, I mean, there was a stretch where before I moved to DC, I was listening to the Michael Savage show pretty regularly. And that was those were his three, his holy trinity: borders, language, culture. Border, language, culture. So that was one of the other fears of so many individuals pouring over the southern border was that eventually we'd be turned into a Spanish-speaking republic instead of an English-speaking republic.
Look, I don't want to wave that off. I think there's a real issue there underneath it all. It's just not as huge a deal as people want to make it. If you come to the United States, you will learn English or you will not be wealthy. It's just that simple. And is that fair? Well, I don't care if that's fair or not. That's just how life is. You come to a foreign country, you learn the language. And everybody who comes knows that. I've never heard a person say, I'll never speak English. My family, as a matter of fact, the Italian side, when they first arrived here back in the 1930s, they refused to speak Italian in the homes. They went out of their way to make sure that their children lost the language. And, I don't think that I would have done that. I think there was probably a better way, but boy, do I understand. I get it. And you have to do that, right? You have to conform to the rules, the culture, the language of the place you want to be. If you want to be there, then that's your problem and you have to solve it somehow. And everywhere I look, I see people solving it.
And you can't hold society in stasis. Society is a living, breathing, growing thing. And so, if you get a huge influx of Spanish-speaking immigrants, no, I don't think that we will become a nation in which we all speak Spanish. What I do think is that a couple of generations down the road, we're speaking a hybrid of Spanish and English. Because that's what a vibrant, living, breathing society does. It adapts.
And look, we're all old guys, right? And if you want to learn a language, you'd be better off getting to that by the time you're 6 or 7, right? But when your brain is set up to learn that new thing. And I know some Spanish. I don't know a lot of it, but I pick it up here. I could probably ask somebody for to point me in a direction or something like this, just like I would in a foreign country. We have 40% Mexican population here. Of course, I pick up a little of it. I'm going to a Mexican restaurant tomorrow. Can't wait. I'll order in what passes for American Spanish, Spanglish, right? And I just can't wait. It's wonderful. Let's go do some more.
And we have this misapprehension or misbelief, I think, that we speak English here and that's what we've always spoken. Well, actually not. If you took someone from the 1700s and brought them here today, you'd be able to carry on basic conversation, but in the broad sweep of things, I would imagine there's probably 30-40% of the words we use, they would have no idea what they meant.
And it's more interesting than that, Ed, because if you go back to the 18th century, 17th, we might well have ended up speaking German in a number of places. That was a very real possibility, and it didn't break that way. But knowing how culture asserts itself and how it grows and moves, a couple of different decisions on that path, and we would all be speaking German. And isn't that's just fascinating? But the idea of the necessity of speaking English, that's so obvious that you don't have to tell the immigrants that they have to learn English. They already know that. And they take every step that they can take. Any city you go to has English language training storefront schools. They're all over the place here in the Mexican neighborhoods. Because where the hell else would it be? Right? We don't need that in my neighborhood. We all have a common language here. 4 or 5 miles south of where I sit, it's much different. People make a living teaching immigrants how to speak English. Isn't that amazing? Everywhere you look, you just see more and more entrepreneurship around this idea.
Okay, we're right at 48 minutes. I want to respect both of your schedules, so we'll wrap up shortly. Dr. Davies, you might have some thoughts on this. I was just thinking, going back to again what the government needs. If you have a critical mass of people not working and people who with no desire to work, that's ultimately going to create another cost. It's going to create multiple costs because those people are going to need healthcare. They're going to need to eat. They're going to need to exist, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think one of the things we've got to be aware of here is don't conflate problems. So we're talking about immigration. And,
yes.
James brought up, for example, the problem of, well, immigrants come here and they make use of the welfare system and that costs us money. Granted, but as an economist, I would argue your root problem there isn't immigration. Your root problem is you've got a welfare system that's set up with poor incentives. If the immigrants come here and they can't get a job because of various laws and restrictions we put on labor, the problem is the laws and restrictions. The problem isn't the immigration. And so I think it's very important that we keep sight of what the real problem is. And in many cases, I'm not saying in every case it's not immigration, but in many cases it isn't immigration, it's something else.
That's right. And we make terrible messes when we dedicate parts of the government to solve problems, right? It rarely works. And I used to ask people, can you give me examples, not including the military, of anything government here in the United States has ever done that came in on time and under budget? You can hear the crickets chirping everywhere. And anybody who's lived here for a while knows that the government is probably going to make a mess of anything it puts its hand to. So why do we keep using a tool that we all know won't work? And that's what we do. And if you keep doing that, sooner or later, everything fails.
And there's an interesting perverse incentive there, because what often happens is we say, okay, we're going to use the government to solve this problem, whatever the problem is. And of course, it doesn't work. And immediately the response is, well, it's because we didn't spend enough money.
Right.
And so now we're going to spend more. And so notice that we've got this built-in incentive that when the government applies itself to a problem, the incentive of everyone involved is not to solve the problem, because if you don't solve it, you'll get more resources on the next budget cycle.
That's right. And for the record, I never got a particularly good answer to the question that I asked. I will concede the moon launch, landing on the moon. I think that was pretty impressive. Kennedy said we want to do this by the end of the 1960s. 1969 it was, right? Okay. And some old man once raised his hand and said, "Young fellow, it's the Hoover Dam." And I thought, you know what? That's right as well. So I'm sure there are a couple of more examples out there. But look how difficult it is to figure out what they are.
And James and I write in our book, Cooperation and Coercion, we have one of the longest sentences in English where James wrote it, where he lists out all of the programs that we have, federal programs, to deal with poverty in this country. And it's 100 programs, all aimed at dealing with poverty and from some perspective. And these programs combined, adjusted for inflation, since their inception, have cost us about $23 trillion.
Which is about what our federal debt is.
Which is not far off of the federal debt, exactly.
Isn't that something?
And what do we have to show for it? Ever since we started the war on poverty, the poverty rate in this country has remained a pretty constant 13%, plus or minus a bit, but basically 13%. So here's a beautiful example of perhaps the largest undertaking of anything humans have ever done since the dawn of humanity. And what has it achieved over, what are we talking, 50 years here? And $23 trillion? Basically nothing. There's been no change.
Not much. Not much. And what can you do? I will say that writing that sentence was one of the high points of my life. I wrote this sentence, and what does it go on for, like 3 or 4 pages, something like that?
Right, yeah.
And I got on a call with Ant. I said, Ant, you're not going to like this. I'm sure you're not going to like this, but at least look at it with an open mind. And 2 seconds later, he's saying, this is the best sentence you've ever written. We absolutely have to do this. So it was nice to be able to point out the obvious problems.
I think I know which passage you're talking about.
It was fun to write.
Very,
It was
very
really
impressive, by the way.
very fun to write, but kind of depressing.
Okay. So we're gonna wrap up shortly. So words, going back to words, conflating migrant workers with immigrant workers. Are they doing that on purpose? Because a migrant worker is someone who's going to come and they're going to work and they're going to go back. An immigrant is someone who's coming to stay. Have you guys noticed that they're interchanging the words?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, when you realize it's a political hot potato,
yeah,
people on either side are going to take tremendous liberties with the truth, and they're going to involve the worst possible examples of fear mongering they can find, and they're going to launch that right into the general population. And I think you have to realize that most Americans want to sit around reading immigration policy. Hell, I'm a political scientist and I don't want to sit around reading immigration policy, right? They want to go bowling. They want to mow their lawns. They want to go to the mall. And I can't blame them. That seems better. So what's the motivation? It's to say something so frightening that that's all they remember.
And you see this elsewhere, and every time you see it, bear in mind that what's going on is there's some politician somewhere or some lobbying group that's trying to sway your opinion with the scary words. So you talk about conflating migrant and immigrant. You see it in the gun debate. The term assault weapon has no meaning. It's just something scary. In COVID, we talked about deaths with COVID, which was something else. It really didn't have any meaningful definition in terms of COVID-ness. And yet people were using these things in an attempt to scare the listeners.
And it tends to work. So as long as it works, people will go right back to it over and over again. And here we sit, right? The three of us could write an immigration policy in the next 20 minutes that would be years better than anything that we have on the books now. I understand that we could do that the same way I know that the sun is going to come up tomorrow. We could literally do it in 20 minutes. So what's the problem? Find out who's benefiting, follow the money, and that's your problem.
Yep.
Okay. Well, I'm going to wrap things up with what they're not talking about. So in the last discussion, we talked about the federal deficit. Okay, so the election is coming up. The midterms are coming up in about 2 to 3 weeks. You're not hearing much talk about that. But I think for this particular issue, I think that if they were just honest with us about the positives, the negatives, the advantages, which you guys have discussed, I think we'd all be a lot better off if they would just openly discuss why they're doing this and the positives of them doing this. But maybe it's not a good idea to say that these individuals, they're coming and they're paying into Social Security, but they're not benefiting from it. So maybe it's just best to kind of slide it under the radar. I don't know. Go ahead.
I'm going back to where we started, which is this idea of putting people into bins. And too often I've heard someone make an argument on a topic like this, be it immigration or guns or COVID or whatever it is, minimum wage. Someone will make an argument, and the first commenter that comes along wants to know, is the speaker a conservative or a liberal? So what that tells me is the person isn't listening to the argument. They want to know, which box does this guy go in, so I know whether to agree with him or to disagree with him.
Whether I should hate him or not.
Right. And so I think with all of these things, and particularly immigration, what's necessary here is everybody take a deep breath and let's look at the data. Let's follow the reasoning where it leads and ditch the whole business about conservative liberal. Let's just look at where the information leads us.
And and Antony and I decided to do this, I think, right about the time we started the podcast, right? To just follow the data. We were going to examine the data, and that would be what caused us to agree or disagree with anything. And, and I got to say, we're not wrong often, right? Our gut instincts are usually pretty good. But I can give you one big giant issue that we still don't understand all that well. And that's the use of guns in American society. We examined gun data of every kind from every angle, and we don't have a single conclusion. We can't tell you anything in any reasonable way about guns. Now, we can talk about the Constitution and what's permitted and not, but that doesn't have anything to do with the evidence of gun use. We can't predict anything. Mass shootings, lone gunmen, right? There's literally nothing we can predict. And that really makes people crazy. They want us to say something because now everybody hates us when we talk about gun violence.
They do, right? But that, James raises this is a really good example because both of us are. Can I say this, James? Yeah. Both of us are gun owners. We're big into gun rights, and we went into this chapter, and at least from my perspective, because I was looking at lots of numbers, I was all ready for, okay, let's find the numbers that shows that higher rates of gun ownership means lower rates of crime and all this stuff that was great. And the data isn't there. It doesn't say that.
It doesn't say the opposite either.
It doesn't say the opposite either. But that's, we followed the evidence where it led. And the evidence came to say that guns seem not to have a beneficial effect, but they also seem not to have a detrimental effect. There is one effect that came out, and that was suicides. That higher rates of gun ownership go along with higher rates of suicide.
And whatever argument's going to work in New Hampshire is not going to work in Oklahoma, and neither will work in Texas. It's radically different place to place to place. And even then, there's no clear trend. You can't look at all 50 states and say, well, here's the answer. You just can't. And Antony, I was so convinced that we were right about this before we bothered taking a look that I'm a little embarrassed now. Right? I don't mind talking about it, but I'm a little embarrassed that we allowed ourselves to have that opinion without really supporting it.
But if you buy our book, Cooperation and Coercion, you will see in the guns chapter a very fair and open treatment of that data that we ran across.
That's right, and everything that we thought we were going to see and didn't. Right? I think it's quite clear that when you look at that chapter, we did our job. Right? We lived up to what we said we were going to do. And that's hard. That's hard keeping a promise to yourself, right? And maybe it would have been easier to conclude things that our core audience would have liked. And yet we don't do that. That's beneath us, and it should be beneath everyone.
Okay. Well, gentlemen, thank you. Thank you for this second discussion on this controversial but important topic. Do either of you have any parting words?
I do, and it's just thank you for having us. I really appreciate it. You ask questions in such a way that I don't know what your perspective is. I think as a host, that's exactly perfect. It's difficult, but you get more on the table from guests if you're not the story. And I really, really appreciate talking to you.
All right. I appreciate that.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Anwar.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Well, I'll you guys will see these go up, and I'll talk to you next time. Thank you again.
Okay. Thank you.
See you soon.
Have a good night.
Cheers.